What's up guys, this is Eric Vasquez here with a brand new design basics video for you today from designcuts.com. Now in this video we're going to be talking all about the rule of thirds and how you can apply it to your design work to help you improve your designs right away. Now there's a basic overarching kind of idea here that you guys can implement in your work, and similar to some of the other lessons that we've covered, such as contrast, negative space, and balance. These are sort of techniques and devices that you should just keep in mind anytime that you're working on a design. So today I'll give you guys a couple of examples of how you can apply this to your work right now. Now over here in Photoshop I have a stock photo that I just wanted to demonstrate this with quickly that I picked up from unsplash.com, and it's just a good website to go to if you're looking for some quick kind of stock photography. In this case it works really well because it allows me to just quickly demonstrate the idea. Now basically when you're thinking about the rule of thirds, a quick way to do this is to sort of break your image up into a grid. So if you have 3 rows and 3 columns like I have here, you can sort of place this on top of the image and see how this works. Now you'll see that this whole bottom portion down here, this is just a great example because this whole bottom portion down here is basically all the road and this colorful sort of bushes and brush and things like that, where this middle area consists mostly of these snow-covered mountains. Now this top row of the grid here is still some of the mountains and some of the tops of those mountains, but it's also the sky. So you can see very easily how this can be applied and just dropped on top of a photo. Now if I were to take this same photo and move it down here, and then let's say I just grabbed that sky really quickly and extended it to the top, you'll see that it doesn't really follow that same formula anymore, and it doesn't really look as nice. But there's something about using the grid like this that just makes it more visually appealing. Even though I'm giving you guys an example here on top of a photo, I want to show you how this can be applied to a print design or a layout, so you get the same idea and you can see how it works in different situations. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and make a square image really quick. And then I'm going to jump over to my folder here where I have some resources that I picked up from the Design Cuts Marketplace. Now here I'm using these English backyard patterns from the Pinata Foundry, and I'm just going to bring in maybe pattern 15 here. Alright, it's a really cool looking, very detailed looking pattern. And if I come back now, and I'm going to bring in just a sort of monochromatic version of that pattern, so I have 2 different variations to work with here, and I'll drop that on top of the original. Alright, we now have the same pattern here, just one on top of the other. One is full color and one is a monochromatic version. Alright, so let's just start with this. Now you can easily and quickly create a grid just by grabbing the rectangle tool, and I'm going to choose none for the fill color and then just add a white stroke. Now I'll leave the pixel set to 6 for now just so that you guys can see the lines, but all I'm going to do is create a rectangle or create a square just by holding the shift key and dragging outwards, duplicating it by pressing Command Control J, and then holding the shift key and dragging it over to the right. Now once I have my first row created here, I can select the top one, hold shift and select the bottom one, press Command Control T to do a free transform, and now I'm just going to drag this into the side so that it goes perfectly across and matches the width of my image. Now I'll bring those up a little bit, and with all 3 of those squares still selected, press Command Control J to duplicate all 3 of them, press Command Control T to do a free transform, and then hold the shift key and drag them down to create your second row. Now repeat this one more time so that you end up with, again, 3 rows of 3. Now I'll select all of those rectangles together, press Command Control T, and stretch it out just so that it kind of falls over the entire image. So now you guys can see that same grid that we now have applied over our pattern. Now let's just say for a minute I wanted to break this up, and I'll just do it really quickly with a layer mask just to demonstrate this. Alright, what you want to do is kind of use these boxes to determine the areas where you want your viewer's eye to go. Alright, so if I turn that off for a second, you can see that we're just basically breaking this up into thirds. Now you don't always have to be so kind of formulaic about it. I'm just doing this for this one example just to really demonstrate how this can work. Now here, this kind of looks nice and balanced because it's very symmetrical. It's got, the monochromatic versions of the pattern on either side. All right, and of course you can go ahead and maybe invert that if you wanted to, so that you have the monochromatic version in the middle. Or what you could do is come in here and maybe even just fill it with a solid color. Now you've got this image that's perfectly split up into threes, and you could always come in and maybe add a bit of text. All right, let's say rule of thirds, and I'm just going to go ahead and change the typeface here to Knox, which is a really cool looking typeface that I picked up from the marketplace just to use for this tutorial. All right, so I could do something like that, or maybe even break this up into a few different lines. Okay, and the idea here being that, by using this rule or keeping this rule in mind, we can create some very visually appealing work. All right, so I'm just going to make 3 lines here. Rule of thirds. And it's one of those things where when I was starting off and getting into graphic design, I never realized how much I would actually be using math when I was working. And not like you always have to be adding and multiplying or doing Pythagorean theorem or anything crazy like that, but it helps to use fractions and decimals and pixels and picas and things like that when you're creating work. So it does come into play quite a bit, and there are some ways that you can apply it. All right, so just like that, we have this nice balanced looking image with all of our text placed smack dab in the center. Now, it doesn't always have to be the case. There are situations where, maybe you have something up in this top corner, maybe you have something in this bottom corner on the opposite side, and then what you want to do is, say, only have your pattern in the squares where there's no text. Okay, so I'm just going to, again, do this kind of quickly, but let's say we do something like that. Okay, and now what we can do is make those 2 areas with our text. We can make this all a different color. All right, so now not only are we using the rule of thirds, but we're using a bit of contrast in there as well. All right, we can take our original text, drop it back in the middle. All right, and just like that, we've created a nice, interesting, and balanced looking layout. Now I'm just going to go ahead and delete that for a second here. Let's bring in another pattern that I can just demonstrate this with. This time I'll go back to the pack here, and I'll just grab the dark pattern. Let's grab number 6. I like the way this one looks. Okay, so I can drag this image over here into my document. All right, and then I can also grab the monochromatic version of it. Right, well, that was number 6. All right, and I'm just going to drop it right on in there. Do a free transform and kind of scale it down so that it fits to the canvas. Okay, and this time I'll turn the grid back on. And let's say I just want the monochromatic version of the pattern in the bottom 2 rows here. Okay, so I can do that. And now, if I were to go ahead and place some text back in along the top, it would be the same kind of idea where we're splitting our image into into groups of 3s basically. And you can see that by just following this kind of rule here and keeping this in mind, we're ending up with some designs that, are interesting and they look balanced. Just like that photo in the very beginning, the landscape photo, you could see how the information was kind of split up evenly and divided in a nice looking way, right? And it made for a more visually pleasing photo because of the way that it was cropped and framed and so forth. So it's not something that you guys have to, follow to a T like what I'm doing here, because I'm just trying to really, give you guys some examples. But, by keeping this in mind when you do your design work, it'll really help you end up with some more successful looking layouts. All right, so let's say now I wanted to keep this on the top here. Okay, I can bring this down, place this in the middle, turn my grid back on. All right, just so I can see what I'm doing here. And now I can go ahead and fill this section with white. Maybe add a nice color in the background here. Well, that's not a very nice color, at least not with that color text. Maybe let me change that up. See, and again, I'm also keeping in mind the idea of contrast. I want to have some contrast here between my text and the color behind it. Okay, so I'm going to come in here, change the text color, maybe to something lighter, not complete white, but something a little bit more off-white like that. Now, hopefully, just from these couple of examples, you guys can begin to see the way that you can use the rule of thirds in your work to create some balanced and visually appealing designs. You've seen how this works with photography, and you've also kind of seen how it works when you're using type and layouts. So if I come back in here, and let's just grab this single color monochromatic pattern for a second, let's just play around with it for a minute. If I create something just really bright and high contrast like that on this dark background, let's go ahead and make this like solid black, like very high contrast looking. All right, and I can turn my grid back on, and you guys can kind of see where these lines fall. Now, if I were to take this pattern, just move it all the way over here and down so that it's really only occupying this lower portion of the grid, that doesn't really do much for us, right? But if we have it over here, or even taking up kind of just the top or just the bottom, okay, we can begin to create some more interesting looking layouts. All right, so this is just kind of a few examples of the ways that you can use the rule of thirds in your work. All right, let me just change up the font a little bit here just to make it a little more interesting. We'll go with the slab version. It's also just a really good excuse to use this typeface because it really is a very nice looking font. Okay, and now we don't have anything on the bottom, and we could bring this pattern back in there. So let's go ahead and it doesn't have to fit exactly into the grid, but the idea here being that we've kind of got these separate elements that are sort of framing the text in an interesting way. Right, so you've got something like that, and it looks pretty cool. And this could almost sort of be a book cover, this could sort of be like a belly band wrapping around it, and the text color is just matching the same color as the pattern in the background. All right, so now I'll just turn that off, bring in my original color pattern here, and I'm just going to turn that grid back on for a second so that you guys can see this again. Just as another kind of example here, whenever you're considering this grid or the rule of thirds, you don't always have to, create a literal grid like I'm doing here. But if you do turn on this grid and you see, the general idea is that you either want to have things kind of framed in thirds like this, or that you would want to place your points of interest around these intersecting points. So sort of the points of this middle square here. Now, if I were to bring in a regular stock photo, all right, let me just come back here. And I'll grab this stock image here from Unsplash. And unlike the other photo where we were dealing with landscapes, we now have this sort of portrait here. Okay, I'll just drop that behind my grid. And if I place, this guy's face somewhere around here where that point on the grid is, it looks pretty interesting, but it actually looks better kind of in the middle here. Right, but you can see that sort of keeping in mind the thirds, this lower portion is mostly consisting of this detail in the car. The middle is sort of this kind of empty area, but it gives us an area to rest our eyes. And then the top portion is mostly where the head is. All right, so if I turn that grid back on, and let's just play around with the crop here a little bit. If I make this a bit larger, and place them over here on the side. All right, and then I can bring in some text. Let me just make this like a Ray-Ban, right? Say he's got on some glasses. They don't really look like Ray-Ban glasses, but just for this example. All right, let's say that we're making an ad for sunglasses or something like that, right? I'm going to change the color here. and then maybe place my text somewhere up here in the top. All right, you can see that the right side of this is basically where most of the figure is, and this other side here, the other half, basically consists of the background in the car. So in this case, I'm not using thirds, I'm kind of splitting the image in half, but just by thinking about interesting ways to divide the canvas and to divide up your designs will help you to create more interesting looking layouts. All right, so let's say you had some smaller text, tagline goes here. Okay, you can kind of place that underneath. Right, so you still have some information up here. You would probably want to have a little more contrast in your background than what I have if you were to do something like that, just to help the text pop out a little bit more. Okay, but that's just kind of another way that you can think about it with photography. So whether you're using photos or creating your own kind of layouts here, you guys can start to see how this can be applied to your work. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of the tutorial, this isn't really something that you guys have to follow to a T. And the nice thing about it is that, once you start to use this more in your work, you won't even really need the grid anymore. And that's the nice thing about it, is that it's sort of a good thing to practice and to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, you guys don't, have to create these grids over all of your images or anything like that. So for example, I don't want you guys to, every time that you're starting a design, feel like you have to, create a grid and then follow this grid exactly. Over time, you'll start to see this grid when you look at things, and you might feel like you're going crazy seeing this grid everywhere, but eventually it's just helping you and training you in a way to have a better eye for design. You're able to kind of break things up in a composition and kind of see how they were using the grid without actually, dropping it over the top of their image. And you can do that as a way to kind of, tweak your design. And that's really a better way to think about it. It's not this, hard rule where you have to use it exactly like how I'm using it here, but just something to keep in the back of your mind when you guys are working so that you can think about, where certain parts of your designs are placed in the canvas and in the space. So hopefully this helped you guys to understand a little bit better how to use the rule of thirds and how to keep it in mind to help you improve your work. If you guys did enjoy this video, go ahead and smash that like button, give us your thoughts and comments down below, and be sure to subscribe to the Design Cuts YouTube channel. I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. My name is Eric Vasquez, here with Design Cuts, and we'll see you next time.